Good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode 102. Those numbers keep racking up. Rack 'em and stack 'em. It's been a big week for this sort of thing, actually. I just saw a post from Luke and I's good friend, Benjamin Aldridge, who's an absolute weapon and probably responsible for me having the awareness that these are even happening most of the time. And Luke's responsible for me to figuring out how to shoot these things. And
Sorry,
we've
everyone.
We've had, oh, yeah, we've had, I think, what did Ben just say? He had 4 Aurora shoots in 5 days in Tasmania alone. So we are moving into what's called a solar maximum season. And I think my understanding is there's an 11-year cycle. And yeah, Luke and I were actually on a guest panel a week or two ago for the Aurora Chasers Handbook. And Ben and myself and Nick Monk had a huge part in bringing all that together. And Luke and I just got a photo or two in as well. And we had the actual launch for the second version of it. And it's a brilliant, not only is it a brilliant showcase of what's possible photographically, it's really insightful in terms of what's actually going on from a scientific point of view, and quite empowering as to how you can find out and access, your own opportunity to photograph them. And in our case, we're a little bit lucky. We've got such dark skies in Tasmania, and we also have a beautiful southern facing, and we're on the southernmost point of Australia as well, which makes a big difference in terms of accessibility to it visibly. Yeah, it's been quite a week. Luke, you got some corkers last night, and he was literally way out in Wonderland, in a place that probably very few people alive might have even photographed in Aurora. You want to chat about that, Lukey?
I've just recently got back from a week in the bush, and I guess over 7 days we'll probably walked about 84 kilometers or something like that, which is quite a lot of distance to walk in the southwest of Tassie. And it's not all horizontal kilometers; it's a bit of vertical stuff in there too. So that was made life nice and challenging. And yeah, when we got up on top of the range after walking for 3 days, managed to score some Aurora from the top of the range, which was pretty lucky, really. The timing worked that way. It's generally lucky to even see the the sky really in that part of the world, let alone an Aurora. So yeah, and we had two in a row there where we're actually able to see it. So that was pretty special. And then promptly came back down and back to reality. So it's definitely been a challenge to say the least. But yeah, well worth it in the end. So yeah,
We've had two pretty massive back to realities this year. 6-7 weeks in one of the remotest areas of the world in Antarctica, and then one of the most remotest areas in Australia in terms of the southwest, sort of almost back to back. So yeah, you're doing yourself proud there, mate. Even Jace here might be nodding his head at some legitimacy of that, because he's a bit of a wild man. Here's the this is the is it going to show? Let's see. Oh, I never figure out how these cameras kind of work. Oh, they're rotate. There's the title anyway. So that's the handbook. In Pursuit of Tasmania Southern Lights, Aurora Chasers Handbook. It's it's a bit of a labour of love, and it's available in a lot of bookstores, particularly down here in Tasmania. The Fuller's bookstore has quite a few copies. I just checked yesterday, but I don't think there's too many around. So if you're really interested in it, look up Fuller's, Fullers bookstore, and grab yourself a copy. It's pretty amazing, inspiring, and empowering kind of resource for engaging with that kind of thing. And yeah, I guess Luke and I just gearing up for a workshop in the Tarkine for 5 days, from Friday to Tuesday, and the weather's looking pretty damn amazing. So I'm pretty excited for that. We'll see if we get lucky with Auroras. It's not really an Aurora sort of area because we're out the northwest rather than south facing, but it's going to be an amazing trip either way. So
yeah, it should be. It's always a special place to visit, and there's always some surprises around every corner. So who knows what we'll find this time around. It's a lot drier and weather's a bit more stable in February. So, but yeah, that doesn't mean much in Tassie. Anything can happen. So I'm very keen to see how it pans out.
Well, where our guest from us tonight probably exacerbates more than most places in the world. Anything can happen. the wild west coast of the South Island of New Zealand is an entity unto itself, and it attracts certain characters and certain types of people, and it's going to be interesting to learn a bit more about my good buddy Jase Blair, brother from another mother, from over the Tasman. Sort of insight into why he's chosen to live there, and what the West Coast sort of means culturally, and the kind of things it gives him access to. Jace is a very extremely competent man in a lot of different ways. He's been working professionally for at least 15 years as a working photographer, and God bless us, there's not so many of us left that are doing that as much as he is and we are. But he's also a skilled writer. He works with a lot of magazines. He's the commercial photographer or runner-up, I think, commercial photographer here in New Zealand. He won the landscape in camera category in 2021 at the New Zealand Iris Awards. I've judged with Jace many times. It's pretty amazing when he gets going. The level of insight he has. He's a very straight shooter. He's a very forward thinker. He's also has a graphic design and printing business as well. So he's got a lot of hats, but in his own time, he doesn't spend a lot of time sitting on the couch, put it that way. He puts me to shame a little bit when I see what he's been up to. And I was hoping to do a crazy adventure with him late last year when I was judging the New Zealand Awards, and the forecast was 5 days of torrential rain and flooding around his way. So I decided to go the other way. And that was probably a good call, because Nelson was underwater for a better part of I don't know how many days. And so that's my short and sweet introduction to Mr. Jase Blair. I'll leave it up to him to fill in some of the gaps tonight. It's going to be a bit of a varied conversation, because he's a very very interesting character. So good evening, Jace. Thanks for coming on, mate, especially a little bit later over there and in Aotearoa.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Excited to be on the show. It's good. I should admit that this year or this summer, the West Coast is the absolute place to be in New Zealand. We're just about in a drought, while the North Island's got absolutely slammed by the cyclone. So I can't be too smug about it, but it's hard not to when we're usually the butt of all jokes about being the wet West Coast. It's been lovely.
Well, we sort of had that here, haven't we, Lukey, where the west coast of Tasmania has become one of the driest places in the entire of Australia, when it normally has meters of rainfall. Everything's just kind of flipped on its head over here too. So have you had any friends or people that have come a cropper or in trouble, or do you want to give us a really quick lowdown on sort of, because we don't get a lot of news here about it, and it's absolutely massive. Obviously, my family all in Auckland has been absolutely copping it. I was over there for a month in January, and I literally left, I think, 36 hours before the flooding started. And I've missed the cyclone as well. And luckily my family's all safe. But I was just checking in with Richard Wood yesterday, actually, to see if he's all right, because I know it got pretty hammered down there. But how has it sort of impacted the kind of psyche of New Zealand, and how would you describe it to people that don't get the news like we don't over here, as to what's actually happened?
Yeah, it's pretty severe. I've definitely lost count of the number of people I know who have had some impact or other. Luckily, my family are sort of in that east coast of the North Island region as well, but all doing all right. So not really impacted, but directly. But I know a lot of friends and a lot of photographers with studios full of mud, and like Richard's been cleaning up mud in his house and studio last week, and it's pretty brutal. Like I saw reading today that the sort of post cyclone analysis shows it was the lowest pressure ever recorded in New Zealand, the lowest atmospheric pressure ever recorded in New Zealand, and comparing it to the two kind of closest previous ones, Cyclone Bowler and Cyclone Giselle. So it's similarly low pressure to those, but slightly lower, and then something like 5.2% more available atmospheric water than Bowler, and something like 3% more than Giselle, or maybe they were the other way around, something like that. So the impact of it being extremely low pressure, lower than ever before, and with the temperature in the Tasman Sea the surface sea temperature being high and the available moisture in the atmosphere just means you get the increasing rain intensity and stuff. It's all the stuff that we know is supposed to be happening with climate change, but you know, in actuality instead of in theory. So it's pretty brutal. You know, bad weather and cyclones have been happening for a long time, but there's no denying that they're getting stronger and more intense, and that'll keep happening, which is pretty scary. But yeah, like I say, we've had lovely weather on the coast, and the flip side of that is that I know with the Tasman being so warm, at some point, like we had Cyclone Fahey and Cyclone Gita a couple of years ago, a few years ago now, were our last big cyclones that made landfall down here. Sometimes they kind of go east of New Zealand and in the North Island cops it, and sometimes they come straight down and hit the west coast. And knowing all that sort of energy is building up in the Tasman means that at some point we're going to cop it, like we're going to return to the average, and all that rainfall is going to catch up. So and it was last year that Westport had really severe flooding, and Greymouth escaped that one. But yeah, it's a pretty real risk of living here, the weather as it is for you guys. And
living here as opposed to anywhere, like we're
well, yeah,
it's
nowhere safe. But yeah, I guess living anywhere in New Zealand, and it's just one of those natural hazards that we live with. But yeah, it's pretty full on. And I mean, if you haven't seen some of the imagery, there's just like a car sticking out of the middle of a barren area of it's like meters of silt, and then there's just a car sticking out vertically with its boot open, or there's a tree stump with a couch on top of it, and the couch is like perfectly intact with the cushions on it still, but it's sitting atop this like tree that's sticking out gnarly out of the mud, and it's just the power of it is really intense. There'll be some amazing imagery that comes out of there, though. You know, minor silver lining.
Where are you? Do you want to explain to the audience where you're based, Jase?
Yeah. So I'm in Greymouth, or just 10 k's out of Greymouth, in a little village called Dobson. Greymouth is on the west coast of the South Island. It's about opposite Christchurch, if you're familiar with Christchurch, one of the biggest city in the South Island. So about halfway down the South Island on the Australia side.
So what's brought you there, or you've always been out that way? You've landed that way. There's a great story about how it's there, and why do you choose to keep living there too?
Yeah, good question, and a regular question, because I remember 18 years ago when my partner and I were talking about moving here. We were just getting out of university, and I would say 95% of people always said, "Oh, we're moving to Greymouth." They were like, "What? Why?" It's a bit of a it's a small town. Greymouth's got about Greater Greymouth, with all the little outlying kind of hamlets and stuff, is about 15,000 people. About 15,000 people, and the whole west coast is about 30,000 people. And it's historically been a pretty working class place. It's had boom bust economy with mining, and its reputation is kind of like has a bit of a redneck part of the country, and I think a lot of people were just like, why would you move there? And then the other 5% of people who would say that too were the best people, and their eyes brighten up and they'd be like, "Oh, that's amazing! What a great idea! Like, why? Yeah, that's the best thing you could do. Like, go somewhere that's not like the big city, or not where everyone else is going. Go somewhere interesting." And so we gave it a nudge and came expecting to be here for a year or two, attracted by the landscape and the mountains, and the lifestyle of being able to go sort of skiing and surfing in the same day, and have an absolute kind of playground in the natural environment, and then for a bunch of reasons ended up just sticking around, and yeah, like I say, 18 years later, I mean 10 years we've owned our house, and we're just stuck here now. Permanent. I just can't think of anywhere else I'd rather be. And I think probably one of the major things that contributed to that was that the youth who grew up here can't wait to leave, as is often the case in smaller towns. And so there's a really big hole in the community and people in their kind of early 20s, which is how old we were when we were moving here. There's just a real gap in the community there for people that age who are motivated and educated, and so because everyone sort of heads away to uni or whatever, and doesn't come back until they have kids. So we moved in and filled a bit of that gap, and found it, like, I mean, I picked up a job as a chef, cooking with no experience in a restaurant, and my partner's a nurse, so she's very, very employable. She had no trouble. She actually had a job before we came here. I just tagged along, and then I picked up a job at the newspaper as a graphic designer with no experience. I went along to my interview, and I'd never used the software that they were asking me to use before. Just bumbled my way through it, and they were like, "Well, yeah, it seems all right." And so if you're just willing to give it a go, they embraced us, and that progressed to very quickly becoming a kind of like an integral part of the community. I got work with Stuart Nimmo, who's a local legend of a photographer, has a gallery in Greymouth, has for years and years, and he employed me for a couple of years. So I was desperate to leave the newspaper after a while, and for a variety of reasons, and he gave me a job and taught me a lot about the what to do and what not to do of being a professional photographer and being a landscape photographer with a gallery. And he 100% convinced me to never open my own gallery. Looks brutal. No, I admire him. I really do. I got a lot of respect for people who run a gallery, but I think it just showed me that I wasn't cut out for it, because and if you're not careful, it's a ball and chain. You get attached to the gallery trying to sell the landscapes, and you need to get out to shoot more landscapes. So he's trucking on, and he does get out as much as he can, but it's a challenge. So but yeah, I'm really grateful to Stu and his whole family. His daughter Lydia's a good friend, and we worked together in that business for a while, and so that really sort of set me up. I mean, I went out on my own, and I'm lucky enough to have a very employable partner, as I say. Brittany's the one who has earned the regular paycheck throughout our time here, while I've chewed my way through a few jobs and then become an independent business owner, and let me kind of like figure that all out while the bills were paid. So that's been great, and slowly but surely we've found our niche and settled into it, and it's been great. I love it here.
So Jace, you kind of diversified a bit. You're a professional drone pilot. You work in writing. You have your graphic design and printing business. You work with magazines. You do videography as well. Like, do you want to just follow through on that natural conversation of progressing into all those different realms, and how they kind of all fit together in the puzzle of Jase Blair right now?
Yeah, still working on how they all fit together, to be honest. But it's a work in progress to some extent. So I guess the description of it for a start is I was just doing freelance photography, but being in a pretty small isolated place and not really having a name for myself at the time, it was a real roller coaster, and it meant that in a lean month we could eat and pay the bills, and that was about it. And in a good month we could maybe go on holiday or go out to dinner once or twice. It was tough to get established, and so and in that time I was doing a lot of reasonable amount of work with a really good friend of mine, Dave Quant, who's a really accomplished videographer, director, cinematographer, director of photography, who was based here on the coast, and he had this little graphic design and print business that was kind of like his bread and butter and his cream, so to speak, his two sort of different income streams. And I worked with him a lot, me as shooting stills and him shooting video on jobs. I also contracted to him doing some design work in his other business, and I also worked for him as a second shooter or second camera operator on some of his video jobs, and learned a lot about the world of motion through working with him. He taught me a great deal about just on the job, on the tools, and we had a fantastic friendship and working relationship where rather than just kind of like being an employee, he really took me under his wing and supported me, and we'd talk endlessly in between shoot, like while on a job, while shooting, or if we were away on a shoot somewhere, we're staying somewhere, we'd be out shooting late into the night. I'd be talking about still photography, he'd be talking about video, we'd be comparing notes about the differences in approach and the differences in gear and nerding out over it all, and that conversation and that his willingness to engage with that rather than just telling me where to point the camera and what button to press was really beneficial. So that developed the video side of things for me, and getting a bit of keeping my hand in the graphic design realm, the skills I've developed at the newspaper, doing a bit of work for him as a designer was really helpful. So I was super fortunate to connect with him and over the years develop that relationship, and that culminated in me purchasing. So he had someone working for him in the graphic design print business, and she had a baby and decided she wasn't going to come back to it. She took time off for maternity leave and decided not to come back. And so I started running that business, or working in that business and managing it while he was out on video jobs, and he was sort of trying to sell it to anyone and he could find, or a few potential buyers, and I was going to keep managing it as part of the deal, and then it all fell through, and I was like, well, I'll just buy it. He sold it to me for a rock bottom price, and pretty soon I found myself sort of running this much more serious grown up business compared to my photography business, which was very haphazard and a little sole trader. All of a sudden I had an office, and I had I had products to sell, and I had cost of sale. I was buying print from the franchise. It's a printing.com franchise, and I had a monthly print bill to pay. I wasn't used to really having any direct cost to my photography business, so that was a real learning curve and a real opportunity at the same time, and it has made my business a lot more viable, where one part of it is constantly ticking over, and it's a pretty reliable profit margin, low but reliable profit margin. It's not a get rich quick scheme, but it churns away, and it enables me to have to pay someone for some admin support, to pay for the rent for an office, to have the basics covered, and then the photography is the cream on top, and it's the high profit margin but high time input kind of work. So it's a nice rhythm, and they both have seasonality, which is slightly different, and as they've both kind of developed together, and there's obviously synergies between them, or there's opportunities to cross sell to the same client. So it took me a long time to realize that even if I had a print customer, they might not even realize I was a photographer. Or if I had a photography customer, they didn't necessarily know I could do design and print. And still, like literally this week, I've had someone who I was doing video work for be like, "Do you know someone who could do some logo design?" And I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I do actually. That's me. That's the other half of my business."
And what about some video? Maybe some drone work.
yeah. And they all work together quite well, because it's effectively I'm a one-person marketing agency, and it's really it's great for the size of businesses that are typical on the coast. And I do a reasonable amount of work around New Zealand as well for bigger clients. But for those kind of small to medium businesses, like often tourism businesses and the like on the West Coast, they're stuck between DIY or going off the coast and paying huge amounts for an oversized solution from a corporate agency, and I can kind of slot in between there, and I really like my favorite thing to do a lot of the time with that kind of work is someone who's starting a business, and I get to be there right from the very start. I help them with their first branding conversation. I design them a logo. We do a little bit of, they're like kind of printing 100 brochures and scared to print 200, and then slowly I watch their business grow, and they eventually they're printing 10,000 brochures, and designing and printing brochures and business cards sounds really unsexy, but it's getting to know someone's business well enough to help them present it to the world, and helping them develop that vision for what it's going to be is really exciting. I've got, you know, lifelong friends for clients in that kind of area, which is super fun. And when they graduate to being a business that can afford a professional photography services, I'm extremely thrilled. You know, like that's the best day with one of those sort of clients, because that's a big jump for businesses of that size. And commercial photographers aren't used to working for little mum and dad businesses most of the time.
So Jace, where does sort of like your passion and skill and ability in landscape photography kind of fit into the bigger equation? You know, and it sounds like things sort of weave together pretty well, and cross over each other, and particularly when you let people know what's possible. But what sort of place does landscape photography have in your life? And I think maybe part of that conversation will reach back into how it began. Is we actually started before the show connecting about that, and it has a nice crossover with Luke as well in a lot of ways in terms of the influences. And there's a Tasmanian connection. Then after we have that conversation, we might start looking at some images.
Yeah, maybe we could look at a photo or two.
Well, we can start that whenever you like. But
well, I guess that sounds like a really good way through it. And I think to answer your first question, landscape photography has been a love since the start. And I probably, when I made a flippant comment about Stu and his gallery and not wanting to ever run a gallery, but that was what I saw myself doing once upon a time, was being a professional landscape photographer. But I think that made me realize that I could keep that as a love, and I might be able to protect it better as a love by keeping it separate from the work. So that's my personal work more often than not. 100% it's part of the business. Like I sell it, and sometimes I sell it as stock to my design and print clients. Sometimes I sell it in an editorial capacity, like as you say, to magazines and things, with a bit of writing. And it's also advertising, right? Like people love looking at beautiful landscape photography, perhaps more than they love paying for it, but at least getting their eyes on it is marketing for the rest of my business. So it's a key. It is an important part of that. And then I guess the other thread that weaves into that, which you've touched on, is that a big part of and a big part of my journey to living on the West Coast is wanting to get out into the hills and into the natural environment, and that goes hand in hand with wanting to photograph it. And so it's hard to say which is the priority sometimes with that. Like I love being out there and I love photographing it, and it's not necessarily always clear which is the reason, you know. Like sometimes there'll be a specific location I want to get to photograph, and so I'll put in a lot of efforts for that purpose. But sometimes I just want to go out there for the climbing or for the tramping or for the whatever, for the exercise, for the activity, and I'll always bring the camera along as well. So I think that's a really big reason I end up photographing the landscape. And I think as that with that part of it's really interesting because and you'll see when we start looking at some photos that my landscape photography has evolved a lot over the years from a much more purist style, influenced by some of my early influences like the Tasmanian greats, Olegas Johannes and Peter Dombrovskis, who you were alluding to there, strong influences in my early development, and still I hold them in extremely high esteem. And also, you know, Ansel Adams and your kind of like your classic, I guess everyone's early landscape influences in photography. That purist approach was very much where I started, and I still love that kind of work, but more and more I find myself gravitating towards depicting the human form in the landscape or an activity taking place in the landscape. And a lot of my work now includes a human subject, and I think, you know, it gives me. It turns it into storytelling imagery, and it gives it scale, and it gives it a different dimension, which I really enjoy. Kind of I enjoy the process of how to incorporate that. Incorporate that human element without detracting from the whole thing or adding to the message with it, which is really nice.
It's one of the reasons that we chose that thumbnail, actually. Jase.
Yeah.
But I thought we had a few options, and I was like, yeah, no, that it needs to be that. It needs to have that little human element. And
I think so. I think that particular image is a great one because that the subject in that is the same subject who is probably in the vast majority of my outdoor landscape imagery, which is my partner Brittany. And she's an absolute trooper, walking back and forwards, or going to stand on specific promontories, or putting up with me taking photos. Taking hours longer than we need to get somewhere taking photos.
She's a patient lady, mate, and she wasn't before she met you. She is now.
She's extremely patient, and beyond that, she's also, and that image is testament to the fact that she has learned how to pose as a silhouette in the landscape. That image where she has her knee out, and like every limb is clearly separated. She's a really lovely silhouette where there's no weird shape. Even when she's wearing a pack, she doesn't end up with a weird shape, mate, which is so easily happens when you're getting a silhouette, a little tiny silhouette. To make them recognizable as a human, they need to pose carefully, and she's an absolute pro at it now. And that's one of the images where I remember talking about it. I was saying something else, and I was like, oh, you were just the right pose. She's like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I've figured this out. I've looked at enough of your work to know how I need to stand. It's like, oh, that's good. Good to have on tap.
Well, Jace, what can we start looking at to flesh out our conversation visually?
I think, yeah, that's good. We should probably refer to something specific. Should I do a bit of a screen share?
And what are we looking at? What are we looking at behind you? That was my first question.
Oh yeah, before I do that, before I screen share, this is where is it? This is Lake Florence in Arthur's Pass National Park. Beautiful spot, just behind the camera. Well, behind the camera from the shot is Mount Armstrong, which was our objective of the trip. But theoretical objective. We're on a little bit of a low-key mission to climb every named peak over 2,000 meters in Arthur's Pass National Park. It's started just about when COVID happened, and then I broke my collarbone, so we haven't ticked off as many as I'd like to yet.
Was that?
How many are there?
There's 22, I think.
Wow.
23. It depends exactly. Some of them are right on the boundary, so it depends which ones you count. We just did one in, not this weekend, just been the previous weekend. We went up Mount Giza, I think it is, Gizeh, which was a winner. But so this Mount Armstrong was the objective for this one, which is one of them. And we didn't actually make the summit, but I was so happy to get to Lake Florence because I've been dreaming of going there for so long. If I lean over, you can see it's a gorgeous little lake sitting in the scree. It's so improbable that it exists. I don't know how.
I know, it's just like how tangibly consistent is that lake's presence in the landscape.
It's gorgeous. It's just cradled there beautifully. And I've looked at it on the map forever, and I was so thrilled to get there. I didn't care that we didn't get to the summit, and then we had something like a 17 or 18 hour day walking out on the Sunday, which was
it's a big day. That is massive.
And the walk in was quite spicy as well, because we came in over this ridge here. You can see on the other side of it, which is the Aotearoa River. Oh, sorry, no, the Rolleston River, which flows down to Aotearoa. The climb out of there was terrifying. It's probably the best I could describe. It's just increasingly steep and loose, and steeper and looser, and eventually just scrambling up a pile of loose choss, and then finally topped out on this big flat ridge and breathed a heaving sigh of relief, and then wandered down to the lake and camped there for the night. It was gorgeous. Relief adds quite a dimension to your experience of a new place, I think.
It really does. I can certainly identify with that with my trip. And seeing the shot behind you, it really does show the starkness or the big difference between the New Zealand and Tasmanian landscape, given, it's such a new country, I suppose, geologically, whereas, a scene like that in Tasmania would be covered in vegetation and have plants coming out of all different angles and up under the cliffs and things. So it's quite a different sort of landscape to be looking at, but we wouldn't have to worry about summiting any 2,000 plus meter mountains here either, because there isn't any. So
well, 16 1613.
Yeah.
We top out at.
Yeah, it's
And,
funny, isn't it?
And everything's kind of really worn down here, Jace. Like we don't have those sharp glacial peaks at all. Everything's kind of rounded, and
Yeah,
I guess the mountains we've got is they're kind of volcanic plugs that never even made it near the surface, and just the rest of the landscape is worn down around them, and that's kind of what's left is the hard dolomite underneath. So, Jace,
quite similar to Stewart Island, is it? I imagine I picture it's quite similar to Stewart Island with big rounded domes and
a little bit more so. I mean, Luke's really onto it in
like bigger.
In terms of how vegetated it is, and I guess that's part to do with it. It doesn't hit as high an alpine kind of area where where a lot of the plants lose the capacity to live well. But it's quite astonishing looking behind you and just thinking, well, where's the plant life for a zillion miles? It doesn't look like anything's there at all. It just looks like a desert.
Yeah,
and that's nothing like anywhere in Tasmania.
It's so funny though because it's our backyard, and that's like every valley in Arthur's Pass, the head of the valley is like that, and like where we went like the other weekend for Mount Giza was exactly the same. You walked up a river and in the beech forest, in and out of the beech forest, and then there's a little bit of scrub at the head of the valley, and then you're just trudging up scree, and it's like 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, and it can be absolutely soul destroying.
At least you didn't have plants trying to rip your pack off every single step, and so there's pros and cons, that's for sure.
We get a bit of that on the west coast though. We get a bit of the
true,
dense monkey scrub, we call it tiger country.
Is it mainly the kind of alpine freeze thaw cycle that makes it so scree like? Or
I mean, that combined with the fact that the greywacke is just not a very durable rock. So you go down to the Darren Mountains and Fiordland or other areas where it's granite and it's not like that at all. It's just giant slabs of rock and big, huge chunks and stuff, and it's totally different experience. But Arthur's Pass in particular and the Southern Alps as a sort of general rule are largely capped with greywacke, which is just it's wheat bix. Falls apart easy.
Wheat picks rocks. That's a great description. I'm going to remember that.
So because you have the Arthur's Pass there, I'm assuming that's a few hours drive from Greymouth, and then I was fortunate to spend a bit of time on the coast a couple of times, but more recently just at the start of 2020, just before the lockdowns happened. And I know the coastline there has so much to offer, and some beautiful sort of almost caves further north, and you've got sea stacks and all sorts of amazing features. So really looking forward to some imagery and seeing what you've got from around the traps.
All right, let's have a look, bro.
All that mouse reconnects. Feels like a lot of pressure now. A lot of hype.
Hey, just out of curiosity, have you had much to do with Andre Apps, like as a character, as an influencer, as a person?
Yeah, I know Andy quite well. Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story about Andy while we're starting to look at some imagery. This is it's an old rail bridge near Blackpool, which is an old mining town that's about 10 minutes from my house. Wow. But yeah, Andy has just moved away to Diamond Harbour, unfortunately. But while he was living in Okarito, I got to know him, and it was quite a funny series of events. First time I met him, I went to Okarito with my partner and a few friends for my birthday, and my good friend Jack, who was in a few of these photos and is a long-term adventure buddy of mine and climbing partner, decided that for my birthday he'd ring ahead and call Andy Apps and arrange for me to go and meet him, and he didn't tell me. And then we were down there for 3 or 4 days, and I hadn't showered, and I was bloody, been out bush bashing and kayaking and whatever. And then he's like, "Oh, come for a walk," and I was like, "Yeah, all right." Didn't seem that unusual. Went for a walk with him, and we start walking up this driveway, and I was like, "Oh, where are we going?" He's like, "Oh, you wait and see." And then we get there, and here's Andy Apps, one of my photographic heroes, up there with Lagos Johannes and Peter Dombrovskis. So, I love his work, absolutely adore it. And then here he is right in front of me, and I'm like looking disheveled and smelling terrible, and I was like, "Oh God, this is kind of embarrassing." And Andy, to his absolute credit, was very polite about the whole thing and invited me in for a coffee and had a good chat. And Jack had teed it up as I was sort of this young enthusiastic young photographer starting out on my journey, and he was very generous with his time, and I went away a bit kind of mortified, but also starstruck, and the stoked that had been so lovely. And then fast forward, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, and I was working for Stu Nimmo, and one of the things I did for Stu was all his printing for his gallery, and so I got quite a lot of experience as a with fine art inkjet printing, and Stu was printing quite a lot on canvas at that time, and so I'd print and coat and protect, put the roll-on protection coating and stretch canvases for him. And Andy called up because he was looking at getting into doing a few canvases. He'd keep getting asked for canvases, and he wanted to know how to do them, and he'd never printed any, so he rang up Stu for some advice, and Stu was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Jace does it all for me. I'll send him down. So I went down for the weekend and met him again. Didn't say anything about the last time I'd met him, and taught him how to print on canvas, and how to apply the coating, and how to stretch and everything. And he gave me a beautiful book and signed it for me, and I went away like, this is just like unreal. what like, I was again completely starstruck and dumbfounded by the whole thing, and even more absurd that I was there to teach him something, and he was so lovely. And then fast forward a few more years, and I kind of got to know him quite well, and then I had to hang out with him down in Aotearoa and go and see him every time I was down there and catch up and got to be quite good mates. And then he was a guest, a keynote speaker at the NZIPP conference last year in Nelson, and I was MC for the conference, so I got to invite him up on stage, and I told the story about it, and icing on the cake was that I was judging the category that he had entered, because every speaker most of the speakers throw in a few images into judging as well, and I judged one of his images and been absolutely savage and just talked it down terribly. And so that was like this full circle moment where I got to invite him on stage.
Oh, it's like it was you. It was you.
Invite him and his son came up to talk together, and they were really great. Julian's really good value as well, and he's a fantastic photographer, commercial photographer. And so I invited them both up and told the story about how it had gone from me being this smelly, disheveled hippie who showed up on his doorstep to then being his tutor for inkjet printing, to then becoming friends with him, to then absolutely shitting on his print and the judging, to then inviting him on stage.
That's a great thread. That's a great thread.
What a journey.
You did a great job of emceeing too, mate. That was pretty funny watching you.
Thank you. It's a good time. I enjoy it. They've roped me in for another year this year, so it's good fun.
I was going to say, like, that's another segue, and I don't know if we can look through images at the same time as chatting over them, but
yeah, we'll find something else while you're chatting.
But it's like that's how I met.
Here's an Aotearoa image. I
was going to say that looks very Aotearoa-esque. Oh, super painterly, Jace. This one, far out. But they have a lot of there's some beautiful lagoons down in Aotearoa, and I went there on a road trip myself, probably 30 years ago, the old thumbing it in the middle of winter, and ended up spending 5 days in Aotearoa and just falling in love with the place, and like 1993 or something. It's
such a wonderful place. It is truly one of my favorite parts of the West Coast, and I love spending time there.
It's pretty, people don't know, it's a very, very tucked away kind of one-way little trip down to this tiny little village, I guess is the most you could call it. It does have access to some beautiful walks and wilderness and gorgeous lagoons and kayaking, and it's on the coast as well.
On the beach, right? The Aotearoa Lagoon is New Zealand's largest unmodified wetland, is the sort of tagline, and it's stunning. And at the north end of the lagoon, in the Waitangi-Taona River, is where the white heron is in this photo, where they breed, the only breeding colony in New Zealand. It's right there.
Gotcha.
This
kind of segues in a little bit, Jason, to your relationship with conservation and conservation photography. If you're talking about sort of species, and understanding of kind of the intricacies of landscapes and ecosystems, and obviously, you know, and those early influences from Peter and Lagos as well. Do you want to talk about that thread of your kind of life?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's it's been quite an interesting journey for me as well. And I don't know what else. What other image can I put up while we're chatting about this? Like something from something from Aotearoa National Park. There you go, Mount Uriah. The wilderness area, and one of New Zealand's wilderness areas. It's my playground. It's right in my backyard.
That's pretty much your backyard, yeah.
Yeah, that's that Mount Uriah there is. I mean, there's no tracks and no huts in the area. And speaking of vegetation that'll rip your pack off, that's where. So that's Jack and Jack's brother Tom. I'm pointing at my monitor. That's no good to you, but Jack and Jack's brother Tom. In the photo there, and the two of us, or the three of us on that trip, coined the term, the Tiger Country scale, TC 1 through 10, for how bad the scrub was to travel through. And man, it got we had to actually turn it into an open-ended scale because it got so bad that we went past 10. You have to factor in the steepness of the terrain and the like, whether you can go under it or you have to go over it, or you know, it's pretty intense. But yeah, so I think when I studied photography, so I went to university in Palmerston North at Massey and studied. I first studied environmental engineering, and then I realized it was mostly engineering and not really that environmental, and the only prospects were to greenwash for a coal mine or work for a regional council desperately trying to enforce regulations, and I wasn't that into it. And
I love how he's such a straight shooter, mate. I just love it. That's just how it is, mate.
Yeah, well,
love it.
There's lots of people who go into that line, those little lines of work and do fantastic things, but it's just not my temperament. And the day one of our we had a mandatory class called Precision Agriculture, and all the lecture slides were sponsored by companies that make the equipment, and I was like, this is just not my jam. And I realized sort of like I'd gone into it because of the environmental side of it, but yeah, it was very much not the key focus. So I bailed on that and did a year at uni, just kind of taking philosophy and ecology and whatever papers sounded cool, and accruing student debt, and then didn't know where I was going with it all. And since I was young, I'd had an interest in photography, and I was talking about that at one point with my partner, and she strongly encouraged me to just follow that, because if I was going to just rack up debt, I may as well do it following my passion instead of just following my nose. And so I dropped out from Massey and went to UCOL, which is the Polytech in Palmerston North, and they actually had a really strong photography.
Well, were Ian and Kay there then?
Yeah, Ian and Kay were there. Yeah, they were both.
That's Kay Davis and Ian
Rotherham.
Yeah.
I'm just going to have another beer. It's all right.
They're very significant figures in the New Zealand culture of photography, those two, and that school has become kind of the paramount school for photography in New Zealand. And I've spoken in there and have become good friends with both of them. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was a huge opportunity, and I absolutely took it for granted at the time. I mean, they taught me so much, and it was so valuable, because also for me, I think the idea of going to sort of fine art school was, and art photography didn't fit with my way of thinking, and so for me, photography is very much the confluence of art and science. I love that it requires technical mastery, and it requires understanding of light and all of that, and the technology side of it is really fascinating to me, which we'll probably touch on more later. But also that all of that technical ability is nothing without an artistic eye and an artistic thought process and a design eye. And so where people I knew who were at art school doing photography were just tangentially interested in the camera, but only as far as it could they didn't bother learning any of the technicality of it. They just wanted to make provocative imagery, or I mean, I'm being pretty dismissive. I'm sure people do lots of wonderful work, but it's just that the art, the pure art side of it didn't appeal, and UCOL being a more kind of commercial focus, but had enough. It was grounded in the technical basics that you needed to be a proficient photographer, but those lecturers had enough artistic skill and interest and personal passion to deliver it in a much more rounded way than just say this is an f-stop and this is a shutter speed or whatever. It suited my temperament to be right in the middle of that art and science confluence really well, and so I did 2 years there and got an advanced diploma or something, and that really set me up incredibly well to be a working commercial photographer, but also to push the boat out a bit with more personal work as well.
We've seen 2 photographs now, so let's see if we can.
Oh yeah, another photo.
Go through some more.
There's the other side of.
I could talk to Jace all day, but the people that don't know the background.
Actually, there's a bit of shot of the same thing.
Yeah, and my sense of the school is it's one of those rare combinations that actually empowers people to take ownership of themselves and learn the real life sort of marketplace and actually have something tangible to move forward with. And I think I was sent to art-based sort of photographic schools, and they're just very conceptual and don't give a lot of grounding or even technical knowledge. And there's technical sides that are all on the technical and just don't have the other. And just spent a lot of time building together a very comprehensive, kind of quite holistic space to empower their students to really grow. And I think Paul Gubner was another sort of big influence there as well.
Paul was a huge influence for me. He was a fantastic lecturer, and from the landscape perspective, as a really accomplished landscape photographer, from a very interesting thing about Paul, he's from a very traditional sort of school of thought around landscape photography, but he's very open to, like, his practice is very traditional, but he's very open to and interested in other kinds of practice. And so he's really encouraging of you to explore any direction. And it's amazing when you start talking to him. I mean, as a student, you start talking to him about some very studenty left field idea which you want to like push the boundaries with, and you think he's going to be like, oh no, you should just stick to something traditional. But he loves it. He loves that stuff. He loves to hear about people pushing the boundaries in different directions, and he's also got a lot of really interesting work that probably doesn't much see the light of day.
You look him up, Luke, sometime, and I'm actually hoping to get him on the show. I don't know if he'd be into this sort of thing, Jace, but I'm at least.
I reckon he would. He's great for a yarn.
He's won the Landscape Photographer of the Year a number of times over there, Lukey, as well. And
cool.
And often his work it's quite progressive, and it's often very serial based and ties together really beautifully and wider sets, and it really just shows this very broad. What's the word? Where he ties his work together beautifully. So you can get the sense there's great underlying conceptual thinking behind what he produces, even though they stand alone individually. A collective is great strength in his bodies of work, and that's a sign of a real master to me when people present their work like that.
He thinks very, very deeply about the concept and the idea that the message he's communicating, and it'll be very understated. Like it's never slaps you in the face, but the more you look at it, the more, especially with his series, works of series, it's like there's never a throwaway image in there that doesn't need to be there. It's everything in its place and everything holding up its part of the story, and
very, very considered. So where are we looking
design
at? Yes, like this.
So this is the other side of Mount Aotearoa. So that previous shot with Jack and Tom looking from the north. This is the south face, and we actually were in there to put up a new route on this. I can probably point out we were aiming to climb this, and we climbed this face up to about this big block here, and up under there, and it was actually pissing down. It was raining it started raining while we were climbing, and it was muddy, and it was all hell.
God.
So we got there, and I led up onto this ledge, which we thought was going to be sheltered and flat under this big overhang. And it was about a 45-degree angle, and it was dripping. And I got there and I was like, no, and turned around and came back down, and then we wrapped off and bailed. And then the next day, this is the next morning, and it was from our camp, and it was beautiful. We've had 2 attempts. We walked in once. The time that this image was the first time we walked in from the north, and it was such a battle to get to it that all we could do was we went over the top and walked past the face, and then had to walk out because we'd spent so much time getting there. We didn't have enough food to stay. And then we went in the second time. We went in the way we came out, which was a lot more direct, and tried to put up the climb. And yeah, still unfinished business, that one. But yeah,
must have plenty of unfinished business out there, mate. That's such a
that's
playground,
right.
mate.
So much of it, and the big thing for me is having partners like Brittany to go out with, or Jack to go out with, who will happily let me take a few kilos of glass and cameras while they shoulder most of the climbing gear and the food.
Oh yeah, that's love, that's support, mate.
Yeah, but then you got to it puts the pressure on. You've got to deliver. You've got to come back with something good. So it's good. It's good for you. Here's Uriah from another perspective, from the east.
Got a real presence, doesn't it? Far out.
It's a real it's a gnarly looking peak, and the Paparoas they're not very high, so this you can kind of tell. I guess maybe this is more a little bit like that's granite, and it's a little bit more like vegetated and stuff is compared to Arthur's Pass, and so the peaks are in the kind of 1,300 meter range, maybe 1,400 meters, and so travel in the Paparoas. There's a few things, like one, you think the peaks aren't very high, so it's not going to be too bad, but it's super rugged. Like it's the vertical relief in that small range is you're just constantly up and down, and you're always above and below the bush line. So the bush in this area, there's kind of open bush typically on the south and west faces, and then and quite dense bush on the north and east faces, and then in between the bush and the open tops, there's always a layer of just almost impenetrable scrub. And thankfully, although not thankfully, there's a large population of feral goats in the Paparoa range, and they nibble their way along the ridge lines, and so you can usually follow one of their paths as long as you're trying to go somewhere that they want to go. But yeah, it's potentially a bit more like Tasmania in that way, and I think people underrate it because it's quite a small park and it's not very high, but it's an absolute rugged. It's so rugged. It's so few people have been. Like I wouldn't want to try and count the number of people who've stood on top of Mount Uriah, but it would be less than a lot of other bigger, more technical peaks, just because it's so hard to get to. And you just look at those faces in it, that granite on the south face, and it's just so impressive. So the southeast face, it's so impressive, and so alluring that we just keep going back in there. Absolute suckers for punishment. I've got another shot of it there. That's where Brittany and I went up and camped here one night, or a couple of nights, and had a little mosey around and swam in a few tarns, watched some deer running around. It's lovely on this trip.
I like how all the portrayals so far is all these pretty sort of soft, low wind, nice days. And There's the West Coast and South Island, man. Like, it is a wild and brutal place, mate. The weather in this place is super gnarly.
It truly is. But I guess the interesting thing about it is that it changes so fast, because like every single one of these trips probably had some inclement weather on it, but it changes so quickly that you often get you get some fine weather on most trips as well. So you've got to be ready for everything, and you learn to just get out in it. Got another. What have we got? Mount Adams here. Further south, just
there's the wild west coast
near Whataroa, looking down to the west coast, Tasman Sea there, and yeah, the ridge we came up, and we walked up, and
what a beautiful ridge.
It's absolutely sublime. And we walked up and we couldn't see a goddamn thing. It was absolutely socked in, and we thought that that was going to be the way the whole time. And we set up camp in the murk inside a ping pong ball, and then about 7 o'clock at night.
Ping pong ball. What's that? Is that
like
Mountaineering?
when you're in the cloud and you're just like, all you can see is white in every direction. It's like being inside a ping pong ball. Oh my!
That's a great analogy. I like that.
And there's another Sunday. So we set up camp in those conditions, and then all of a sudden, while we were all holed up in our tents, it just cleared miraculously, and it turned out to be an absolute playground up there. And man, it was gorgeous. Looking south at the ridges stacked towards Franz Josef and what have you, and the incredible geology, just gorgeous. Gorgeous landforms and the quartz and stuff.
It looks like all quartzite, yeah, by the looks of it.
Yeah.
Oh, you're walking in crystal fairyland, mate.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. And it's just, this place is such a playground, and then you go up the top and have a peek over the other side to the big hills, the Gardens of Eden and Ella.
That doesn't quite look like a playground. That looks like a place for psychos to go, to go out and have a play with a death wish.
Yeah, there's certainly all scales of
it looks like all kinds of trouble, mate, as a playground.
Seriousness available. Yeah, it gets pretty hairy pretty quickly. You only really get to play on the edges a lot of the time. The amazing thing is that there are lines through this.
New Zealand's one of the ultimate playgrounds for developing mountaineering skills in the world. And it's long been renowned for that. And for that very reason that Jace was saying, like there's a sliding scale of opportunity to build your skills and make sort of considered sort of risk choices about and all the way up to getting into some pretty serious stuff. So it has a lot of mountaineering schools there, and a lot of people even go there to build their skills up from overseas. And yeah, it's a very indelible part of the I don't know if it'd be fair to say global, but certainly in the Southern Hemisphere, it's one of the great playgrounds.
Oh, we definitely, and we produce world-class mountaineers because of it. It is amazing what the access to technical terrain is unparalleled just about. It's great. You can just go for a wander, and in no time you're in the big serious stuff. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And it's here's a good example. This is Lake Karopataka, which is just near Arthur's Pass, and Brittany and I went there for when we actually walked past Karopataka, and then we went to up the river a little bit to the Aotearoa hot pools. There's a natural hot spring there, and we just wandered up, and it's only a few hours, and we camped. We lazed around in the hot pools, and we put up the tent and camped there and had a really nice time. And here's the lake again, and it's just gorgeous, and it was really cruisy. And then we thought, well, maybe that was a bit too easy. So I'd read somewhere that there was a line from there up to Mount Pfeiffer, up to, there's a little biv, Pfeiffer biv, 800 meters vertical or so above the lake, and I'd looked down from Pfeiffer biv at the lake previously, and I was pretty sure I knew where to go. So I was like, oh yeah, we'll take this little spur and shoot up there, and pretty soon we were in some of the most serious scrub I've ever been in, and we were too committed. Like there was a open kind of gravel scree slope that we followed for ages, and then we got into like dense but not too dense bush, and we pushed our way through and found a line and got up onto the spur, and by then so much of the day was gone, and we were so close to the top, we were kind of fully committed, and it just got so steep, and the scrub got so dense, and pretty soon we were like all of 3 or 4 meters apart and couldn't see each other for the scrub, and we're both swearing and getting cut and scratched and poked in the eyes, and like taking our packs off and scrambling through a hole and then dragging the pack through and climbing up this steep spur, and it just got worse and worse. And then to make matters worse, there was a thunderstorm coming, we could see from a mile off, and it just felt so desperate. And then we finally like blew out the top, and it was just, this is on the tops there, and it's just gorgeous. the thunderstorm went past like left to right in this image, up the main valley that we were next to, but we didn't get a drop of rain. And this is Fife above. This is above at the top, and it was just like this amazing experience of like 0 to 100 in no time at all. Went from like a cruisy, easy stroll to just like absolutely committed, serious situation in no time. I couldn't believe it. And it's a really good example of that kind of that sort of situation. Oh, that's just somewhere else now. But
do you take out many particular GPS devices or anything like that, just from a route finding, or like to make your way back, or you're pretty well versed in reading the land like that?
I'm pretty old school in terms of map and compass as a preference, and I mean I take a phone with maps on it as a kind of convenience, but when the travel gets serious or the navigating gets serious, very much I trust a map and compass, because I've had GPSs with dead batteries, and I've made mistakes because I thought a glance at a GPS was all I needed, and so the deliberative process of planning and navigating with a map and compass makes me feel much more engaged with the whole process. So that works for me, and I guess, you know, a lifetime of off-track travel, you'll really catch us walking on a track around here. So,
Jace, if you go back one, sorry, you finished, Licky.
No, that was what I was asking you. Just
no,
it's nice to have the scope that you have, I suppose, to be able to go off track and just pick a line and go with that and see where it takes you. So that's pretty, very fortunate.
I know. I love it that way, and Brittany and I both, we talk about this often. Like, walking on tracks just seems it's fine to get somewhere quickly, but the idea of going for a whole tramp where you're just on a track the whole time just does my head in. I want to be making decisions and thinking about things and looking around at the land and looking for the coolest place to go and living with the consequences of my decision. So
that's a good way to put it. I mean, because there are a lot more consequences if you get things wrong doing that. Because somebody's already done all the assessment and designed a track to navigate all the hazards and get you through pretty safely and pretty easily. And sometimes it's fairly extreme environments that, if you were off track, would be really serious. So yeah, I really appreciate that sense of engagement, because you can't navigate off track without being super engaged. And one comment you make earlier, you went over really quickly, but it was understanding how the vegetation changes relative to the angle of the face that it is, or even the season, and how that can heavily influence off-track navigation. And people like Grant Dixon here, Luke, as you know, have that incredible knowledge of the flora and where and how they sit relative to altitude and feel of the sun. And, you know, there's some that comes from just brutal experience. Places where you're almost dying and like scrub and like, and you
learn pretty quick, I suppose, when
you remember the one time you got it wrong forever. So you don't.
I'm smiling because look, he's fresh out of the bush and just dealing with all of this, and I'm kind of
to a degree, but it was all tracked. To be honest, I was very glad it was, because there's no way you sort of just scratching your head going, how the hell did anyone work out that's the way it worked? But it's certainly a pretty exciting prospect to be able to work these sort of routes out for yourself and have the confidence to be able to rock climb and other aspects to get where you need to go. It's definitely next level.
Jace, can you go back one photo quickly?
Was that this one?
Yeah, like a lot of people who don't know about New Zealand, they might not understand the significance, relevance, and copious amounts of huts and New Zealand, which is probably unlike anywhere else in the world that I'm aware of. And when I left New Zealand, it really struck me. I was like, what do you mean there's no huts? I was like, I thought that was the same everywhere, because how many huts are in New Zealand? Like 3,500, 4,000, 5,000 or something? They're just everywhere.
Yeah, especially on the coast here.
Yeah. Do you want to speak a little bit to the history and the role of huts in terms of the wilderness in New Zealand?
Yeah, so there's a really strong history of hut building and on the west coast in particular, but around New Zealand, up north as well, even a big part of it was the deer culling sort of days when the government put a bounty on deer, and they had, you know, government funded deer culling in the high country, so the cullers had huts that they'd go and live in, and it's a whole fascinating history unto itself, where they'd bloody flying around in helicopters, shooting out the window, and then sling loading just so many deer out. And they still do it on small scale. They still do it for venison recovery for commercial market, and I've seen it happening, and it's a sight to behold. You know, 30 deer slung under a helicopter flying out of the bush. It's really quite incredible to see, and yeah, so there's this, because of that, there's this network of huts that were put in place for the deer cullers, and then the Forest Service, I guess that sort of morphed into, or was associated with the Forest Service, and the Forest Service also put in huts for a variety of purposes. And then the Forest Service became the Department of Conservation eventually, and DOC have maintained a large proportion of those old huts, and there's a few others. There's some that are purely for recreation. There's a history of a good history of alpine clubs. Sort of clubs in New Zealand are a big deal, big part of life, and traditionally, and alpine clubs have built huts for recreation purposes. CMC, Canterbury Mountaineering Club, has a lot of huts they still operate. The West Coast Alpine Club, which I've been involved with for a long time, has had a series of huts, which some of which are now sort of looked after by the Department of Conservation, and some of which don't exist anymore. But they used to, the West Coast Alpine Club had the original Carroll hut on the Kelly Range, which is not far from where this one is, and they had members carried in a motorcycle engine and ran a rope tow, had a little private ski field, club ski field there.
Amazing.
There's a great history of club ski fields being run like that. There's one in Nelson Lakes National Park where they rode the equipment across the lake to the bottom of the Pinch Gut Scree, it's called, and carried it by hand up to the old club ski field, which is not there anymore, but the buildings are still there. Yeah, so there's all these sort of like various threads to it, but as a consequence, there are innumerable huts, and a lot of them like this. And this is a new rebuilt, new construction on an old hut site. So this is a modern one, which is sort of double glazed and a little bit fancier, but still, even then, it's tiny and bare bones accommodation. It's wired to the ground so it doesn't blow away, and there's one sleeping platform which just fits 2 people in there, and it's tiny, and these little bivs are common above the bush line, where there's no vegetation to have a fire, so there's no fireplace, and nothing significant anyway, and often they'll sleep kind of two or 3 people at the most, and
why so much effort for such tiny places that can't accommodate many people?
Well, I guess they don't get a great deal of use, and the idea is probably that they're an emergency accommodation in a way. You know, like you expect, if you're out there, to be self-contained, and a lot of people are going to be camping on the tops or whatever. But if you need it, that's your kind of like last resort, where you can get guaranteed shelter and hide out for a storm, and what I alluded to earlier, the weather can change so quickly, both for the better and for the worse. Often it's just a matter of, you know, you got to hold up for a few hours for the worst of the weather, and it comes in so quickly that being able to get to one of these it saves lives. So it's all you need to have there to get out of the weather, which can be the difference between life or death. And I think that the legacy of having all those huts there, which have now become a huge recreational asset, and so the rise of tramping clubs who got out into the hills and made the most of these areas, turned them into a recreational asset, and that's why they've been preserved, because they do literally save lives.
Let's keep looking at some more, mate.
Yeah, so I guess that's a good segue, actually. So this this photo, which was the next one I was going to show, was is on the Hitchin Range, which is on the way into Ivory Lake Hut, which is the holy grail of New Zealand tramping huts. It's at the head of the Waitaha River. So there's the Waitaha River down in this valley. There's top Waitaha Hut is just down on this flat here somewhere, I think. You might be able to see it, but and then up Stag Creek here, at the head of Stag Creek is Ivory Lake Hut, which was put in as a climate change research, to tie back to one of the earlier conversations, climate change research or a hydrological research. And the Ivory Glacier was part of an international study on hydrology and climate. So they put in a hut to facilitate that study, and it's become the sort of the holy grail of New Zealand tramping. It's really hard to get to. Sort of, if you go directly up the Waitaha, it's 3 or 4 days of hard walking, and the Hitchin is the secret shortcut if you're up for a little bit of exposure. So you can see this ridgeline here gets a little bit spicy, but it's not too bad. You go up over Ragged Peak here, and then drop down all the way down to that flat where just above top Waitaha Hut, and then you wander up Stag Creek here and come out. This is the outlet from the lake, just comes cascading down this schist. It's one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in the backcountry. It's just incredible. It's absolutely stunning. And
wow.
and then the hut's perched right beside the lake on the bare schist on the rock, and that's the Ivory Glacier there on the other side of the lake. And once upon a time, it came halfway across the lake, and in winter the whole thing would be frozen and full of snow. But over time, it's just slowly receded to this little remnant that's tucked in over the other side there. And this is the first time I've been there twice, and we walked in beautiful weather and sunshine, as you saw in the previous images, and then knew that the weather was due to pack up, and we holed up in the hut for 48 hours of absolutely torrential rain and intense wind, and just had a lovely 150 cups of tea, and read every scrap of reading material we could find in the hut, and just tinkered around, and occasionally went out to take a photo, and then the sun came out and we wandered back out, and just absolutely stunning. It's everything it was cracked up to be, and we'd planned quite an ambitious route out, and between moving a bit slower than we needed to, and then getting sidetracked by a mysterious empty tent that we found pitched in a weird spot, given that there'd just been a raging storm. We had a bit of a panic that someone had gone missing, and then decided that we didn't have enough information to do anything about it. So we just hoped that everything was okay. And then so we walked out down the Waitaha River, which was a character building experience, which I will never repeat.
I was going to say, that looks right, like a crazy thing to do from what I can see.
But then when we went back in with Jack, good mate Jack, and his brother and his partner, and then walked out the way we intended to. So if I go back to this photo, we walked out by going can I work it out from this photo? Yeah, so we walked out by going up this bridge here, and then up over, this is Artist's Dome, and then drop down the other side, and then down into Mount Blomfield, and then Artist's Dome, and then down into the Smythe River over here, or the county stream over here, and then up onto the Smythe Range and down into the Smythe River over the next ridge. So, and then out the Smythe Range all the way back to the start in a big loop. So that was the initial goal the first time, which we didn't manage to pull off because the mystery tent was pitched down here, and we couldn't work out where its owner had gone. But we never heard of anyone going missing. So
I usually leave a tent behind. That's
That was really strange. On the way in, we saw him there, and he was outside a tent, and we waved at him, but we were kind of on this side of the river, and well, you can zoom right in. He was pitched he was pitched over here somewhere, and we were over here, and we sort of waved at him from a distance, and then kept on our merry way up this way. Then on the way out, the tent was still there, and I went and sort of said hello and didn't get any response, and tapped on the tent, didn't get any response, and then opened it up and had a look inside, and it was the most. It just looked disgusting. It just was like an absolute mess, and it looked like a tent would look if someone had just been holed up for 48 hours during a storm. But there was no one to be seen.
Looks like.
Yeah, probably what my tent looks like most of the time as well. But it was a bit confronting, and I was like, "Oh, what the fuck are we gonna do?" I considered pulling the PLB, and we sat down and had lunch and talked about it, and decided we didn't actually know that there was something wrong. So never.
That's a tough one. Yeah.
Never heard anything about an accident or anything happening, anyone going missing up there, so it must have been all right. And the funny thing was, it turned out our friend, a really good friend of ours, was basically one step ahead of us the whole way. We'd seen his footprints, and he had gone past that tent. He'd stayed at so we ended up going down to the hut to see if the person from the tent had bailed on the tent and gone down and stayed at the hut instead, and there's nothing in the hut book, but our friend was in the hut book saying he'd just stayed there the previous night and had gone out this way over the top where we'd planned to go and into the county. And so then we caught up with him when we got out, and he'd been mere hours ahead of us, and we didn't even know, which was pretty okay.
Oh wow!
It's a small world on the West Coast.
Yeah, what's the sort of average trip length you do, and what's sort of how far have you pushed that in the grand, like over the years?
We'll get out for as little as a weekend quite happily. I mean, we definitely, like the last trip we did was we got away on a Friday evening, walked in for a couple of hours, put up the tent, and then kept going and got out on the Sunday. And that's probably a more typical, or a 3-day. Sometimes we'll take one day off or have a public holiday or whatever. But at the other extreme, we've done 11, 12 days on the trot.
Wow.
In one go, and basically the maximum you can do while carrying food and not having to have a food drop is in that kind of range. And I'd love to get into doing longer stuff by putting some food drops in. I've long dreamed of doing a Southern Alps traverse from the north end to the south, trying to stay as close to the main divide as possible the whole way.
Yeah, one of my friends over here has done that, who I work with sort of regularly. I think she did 110 days or something. Oof.
Outrageous.
Last time I was at Jace's place, I was doing some of this. I was like, Jace, we're going down that. That's like, I don't even know if I can walk down that. I was like, you'll be right. Just hold on to the brakes. I was like, okay, mate.
Yeah. That was a good time. This is the new Great Walk in the Aotearoa National Park. So they put a new track in. It's the first new track in the park.
My family did it at Christmas, just for Christmas.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're calling it a great walk, haven't they?
Yeah, it's a great walk and a great ride. And here's the other direction. It's a stunning. It's amazing. I highly recommend it. I've ridden through it. I did a lot of work. So this is for work, these shots. This is working for the Department of Conservation with models, photographing it for their promotional material and everything. And so we spent quite a bit of time up there doing that, just riding little sections and putzing around, and we did that kind of flying into a hut and then riding bikes back and forward to kind of get to the different little parts, and that was amazing. And I was really, when I first heard about the track, I was a bit kind of like, well, you're going to do what in my personal playground? But then I got quite excited about how good it sounded and the potential for it. And then we spent some time up there. I spent some time up there working and I was just frothing for it. And then I finally got a chance to ride it just for fun without 30 kilos of camera gear on my back, and it's an absolute dream. I've ridden it twice now. It's a huge asset for the community and for tourism. It's an infrastructural tourism asset, and it's also just a really great mountain bike ride, which is cool. So So yeah, we had
How does
have
it
the best
compare to
weather.
like the Ghost Trail?
Old Ghost Road. I've never ridden the whole Old Ghost Road. I have ridden quite a lot of it, variously for work purposes mostly, and it is really good. I think
I've been mountain biking the Ghost Road for work. I love that. It's like one of most people's dreams ride. Like, oh, I just work there. Like,
yeah, I just flew around in a helicopter and rode little bits of it. Oh man, those are the dream jobs. I pinch myself with that stuff. It's a huge privilege. But yeah, I think the Ghost Road is more of a bikepacking route. It does have some exceptional riding in it, but it's longer and more. It's got more climbing and it's more techy, whereas the Paparoa track is just a fantastic mountain bike ride. It's a great ride in a day, or over 2 days, but I think it's just so good. It's they complement each other really well. I think the West Coast becoming known for big days out on 2 wheels. The Heathy track, the Old Ghost Road, and the Paparoa track, and then supported by the likes of Reefton, which you came and sampled with us. It's there's another shot of the Paparoa track. So it's they all have their own character and they're all a little bit different. They're all really good for sure. The Paparoa is it's phenomenal, and being up there. I mean, we got, as you can see, we've got abysmal conditions for the really talent. We're absolute.
looks like an e-bike. Is it an e-bike?
I just no, it's not. I think you guys still hear me? My thing's just disconnected.
Oh, you sound, yeah.
No, don't. That's not
I
happening.
think we've lost you now, mate. Sound. Oh my God, he's out talked us.
Yeah.
Oh, here he is.
Sorry, I don't know what happens in my headphones. They just mysteriously disconnected.
That's sounding fine. Yeah.
So
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay,
Yeah.
sweet.
Great
You can see it was abysmal conditions for the shoot, and so I was lugging speed lights and light stands and soft boxes to try and give the light something exciting, and faking some sun through the trees.
Oh, that's going next level, mate.
And just trying to make it look anything but dreary on this one, but it's good. It's a good few days out.
That's I've done a little bit of that kind of photography myself, and you're always hoping for those bluebird days where it's just makes it an easy sell for people to be out on track. So don't envy your position.
The funny thing about it is that 90% of people's experience on this track is probably not too dissimilar, but to what we had those conditions. But the nice thing with that kind of weather is every now and then you get this kind of shit, which I didn't have to actually put a fake light in the trees for this one. This was a real bit of sun peeking through, but
that's fantastic.
So
get around light stands and softboxes up here. Far out, man.
Oh man, my pack was so heavy. The number of times I've lugged that camera bag. I have like an f-stop backpack, and I have light stands strapped to one side, tripod strapped to the other. Just the full works, and the amount of time I've spent with that on my back riding a bike around, it's absolutely ridiculous.
That'd be torturous.
It doesn't make riding much fun, and then you get to a little bit where it's actually like downhill and a bit fast, and you want to let loose, and you're like, I absolutely cannot let loose.
Oh yeah, the cost of any damage would be pretty bad.
Yeah,
and then you've got all that weight on your back, so it's going to throw you around a fair bit. Yeah,
exactly. No, it was good. It was good time and a good result. And I guess that's the problem is you get a name for that kind of carry on, and people keep wanting to book you to do it. there's
you do a bit of drone work with the bikes too. Or
sorry,
have you done any drone work with the bikes as well?
Yeah, those first shots were.
They were drone. Yep.
Yeah, and this is me scrambling up in the bush, but yeah, definitely get the drone out for the bike stuff quite a bit. You have to be careful with the drone on bikes, because people on bikes look stupid from directly above. I've done a lot of work for the West Coast Wilderness Cycle Trail Trust as well. There's a kind of grade 2, 3 gravel off-road cycle trail for your sort of retirees on the West Coast, as there's a lot of them springing up all over the country, and they're lovely, and I like photographing them, and I often bring the drone out for that. But if you're not careful, you end up with people looking so weird when you get too high, looking down on people on bikes. But yeah.
Maybe with a shadow, like so you top down, they look weird, but the shadow makes it.
The shadow can solve it. Yeah, if you get a good strong sun. I'm trying to think. I actually thought I had one of those exact shots here, but I don't have it in this collection handy. But yeah, exactly. That's the saving grace. That can be really cool and a nice abstract, especially if you get a really cool bit of landscape that they're in, or on the cycle trail it goes past some interesting man-made structures, like there's a dam that rides along the top of, and then there's a big glory hole type feature, where the water pours in and goes underneath the embankment. And
right.
I've got it. Yeah, I wish I could find that quickly, but I don't know where it is. But
it's always the way.
Shot down on that with cyclists with a lovely shadow sticking out the side. That can be really nice.
Fantastic.
Yes. So I guess, but maybe that's a good. I feel like, Paul, you asked me a question a little while ago that I've totally sort of diverted away from.
Yeah, it was. I was talking about the conservation line. We sort of started on it, and that I've seen you write about the level of impact and influence that Peter and Olagus had on your relationship photography, and how it can be used with greater meaning and purpose, and where. You've hinted a little bit at some of the conservation roles or maybe projects you've been involved with, but be nice to hear more about that, Jase.
Yeah, for sure. I find that really interesting. I do quite a bit of work for Greenpeace, and I didn't put any Greenpeace stuff in here, but I wonder if I can really quickly dig some up. Because that would be quite cool, because that's something that I really
we've got about a half hour, Jace, so just be
don't fuck around.
No, my point is if there's anything particularly you're particularly passionate about right now in your life, or that we'd love to touch base on before the end of this show, because I have a feeling we're going to have to do a part 2.
There can't be that many people that have done that sort of work with Greenpeace before. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think that's probably a whole separate conversation in itself, because it's quite a different style of photography and stuff. But it is interesting that that work can be. I mean, that's really fulfilling work for me, and I try and where I can do it for free or cheap, but for as cheap as possible for them to. So I have a really good relationship with the GPNZ crew, who I think for them it's great to have a reliable photographer who's not afraid to go more than 10 meters from the car, and I've been trespassed from a few places now as a result of being a little bit too enthusiastic about getting involved, but I've managed to evade arrest, which is nice, but mainly because the priority is getting the images out, so they won't let me do anything that risks that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
that objective. But
it's not about you; it's just about the images. That's right.
Yeah, that's right. But it's it's exciting, and it's dynamic, and it's really interesting work. It's always quite challenging, because there's always really different constraints on, like, they're trying to install a banner on something before the break of dawn so that they don't get caught, and I've got to somehow document it, and so we always have a lot of fun trying to work out the logistics and the push and pull between the campaign objectives and the fact that if they don't get any photos of it, there's no point in doing it, basically. So it's a really fun challenge and a really like creative outlet, and also a really good cause to for me to have an opportunity to pour some time into that. And I guess the interesting counterpoint to that, which I do have some imagery from, is I've done some work for instance, for the local fishing company here, and been out on an overnight trawl, watching them, commercial fishing, which is the sort of flip side of the coin in terms of sustainability, but it all sort of I find it also fascinating to understand both sides of that, and to get the first-hand experience of it. So I jump at the chance of getting an opportunity to when they asked me to go out on a fishing boat and spend a night out on a boat offshore, I was like, yes, that sounds amazing, and it gives me this first-hand experience of it. And yeah, it was very confronting in terms of a lot of details, some of which I won't go into what went down, because the fishermen are pretty brutal, and it's a pretty brutal industry. But at the same time, the bird life was incredible, and I really enjoyed it for a lot of reasons. And now when I'm out on that maybe the most extreme part of that is version of that is I went to the Faroe Islands for a climbing expedition in 2016, and
I remember your video of that. That was great.
Yeah, so that's a good little plug. I watched the Trollfinger film. It's easy to find on the internet, and it's free to watch on Vimeo. So hunt that out. It was a cool little project, making a movie and climbing it. But one of the interesting things that happened was the Faroe Islands is a traditional whaling nation, and you can imagine that provokes quite mixed responses from the world. And I went in kind of like not feeling that good about it, but thinking that we were there to go climbing, so it didn't matter. And then even before we got to the Faroe Islands, when we met up with some Faroe Islanders in Copenhagen, they offered us whale meat. Oh. And I was like, well, I'm probably not going to have another chance in my life to try this, so I'll give it a go. And so I've eaten whale. And then I, a few years later, had the opportunity to go out on the Rainbow Warrior for a cruise around the South Island down to Stewart Island, looking for whales with whale scientists. And I just took absolute glee in revealing to them that I'd eaten whales. and watching their minds blow. But also, like, it provoked a really interesting discussion for me, because I think I'm definitely not pro whaling at all. Certainly not commercial whaling, but the difference between the nuance of any argument, and the difference between a customary harvest of a food source versus a commercial exploitation of a resource like that is quite interesting, and it's pretty hard to come from New Zealand, which has a fairly destructive fishing industry, and then say that a small-scale, tiny island in the North Atlantic that kills a few whales every now and then is somehow worse than that. So I love getting into the ins and outs of those kind of things, and having the experience to back it up, having been to the Faroes and having been out on a commercial fishing boat, and having spent time, and having the sort of, I guess, the street cred in the Greenpeace crew. I think that's a really valuable thing about photography, that you just get this window into all these different worlds.
It's kind of about.
It is definitely a gift. Yeah.
It's about picking your battles. Like I got invited by the captain of the Sea Shepherd to be the documentary photographer in West Africa for 3 months, and chasing down rogue fishermen and all that kind of stuff. And when I looked at the potential consequences of what it meant I'll be banned from 10 countries for the rest of my life by just being associated with Sea Shepherd, and there's 10 guys with machine guns living on the boat and from Ghana, and it's just and it's equatorial Africa in the hottest time of the year, and you're 3 months living on a sack next to the diesel generator. It's kind of like the romance started dropping, and I needed 17 shots in like 10 days, and they couldn't even pick me up on land. It had to be this secret pickup in the dark or something. It's sort of like, it's sort of crossed the line for me, like, and I'm
Yeah.
listening to where your line is, and the role of you as a photographer, because you're potentially reaching that line where you may get arrested, or there might be consequences for your career outside of the efficacy, and questioning, are you making a difference? And that was a question we talked about before at the beginning of the show.
Yeah, I was going to
Yeah.
also ask the similar thing, Paul. And you're doing work for the government, as like with the Department of Conservation and that kind of thing. So and then you're working for like a organisation that is generally just establishmentarianism, or however you say that. So how do you just sort of follow your passion and see where it all sort of ends up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, and I think the ethics of photography get really interesting in a lot of different ways, because to some extent the point of you being there is to be a dispassionate observer, or there's this idea that photography is inherently objective, but at every step it's not, because you choose whether to take the job or not, you choose where to point your camera and not, you choose when to release the shutter or not. So even before you get anywhere near manipulating a photo or anything, photography is deeply instilled with politics and choices and your biases and everything. And so I think my approach is very much to be as open-minded as possible, and to to do my best to let the images speak for themselves to some extent, and to take the opportunity to photograph it, because at least, I mean, this fishing boat, for instance, this image that we're looking at right now, I think if I hadn't gone out on that trip, these images wouldn't exist, and they are an insight into that world, and that's valuable, whichever side of the argument you're on, and wherever you sit with it. And I wasn't, my choice to go or not go wasn't going to change the fishing boat going out or not, and that's a bit of a nihilistic kind of perspective, but I think it's it's interesting.
Pragmatic.
It's pragmatic, and I think I think that range, that breadth of experience that I referred to is what I'm looking for, where I can come to a more informed conclusion about the world, and I really value that opportunity to see the diversity of things that I've seen, and had the privilege to be there to observe and to document, and surely to document them is better than not to. And I remember really this. Maybe this is a bit of a segue, but I remember that this really powerful kind of moment for me when I was at UCOL studying photography. Some big shot photojournalist, some war correspondent, I can't remember, I don't remember his name, which is pretty bad. It's probably famous, but came and spoke to us. He was in New Zealand for the World Press Photo exhibition or something like that, and he was touring around for some reason, and they booked him to come and talk to us, which I was absolutely smitten and excited and a bit starstruck to meet him and whatever. And then I remember someone asking him, I think it was in the question and answer portion, something, he was like, basically, we're not heroes, don't take it too seriously. There's still wars, what's photography achieved? There's all the bad shit still happens, and we just take photos of it. So don't glorify it. And I was just absolutely crushed by that, like, very grim kind of and matter-of-fact discussion of it. But I went away and reflected on it, and I think over the years I've reflected on it and thought, well, for a start, we don't have a counterfactual, so we don't know that without photojournalism what the world would look like. So we, perhaps potentially it could be worse. Lately, it's starting to feel like it's hard to imagine it being worse sometimes, but with current affairs. But it definitely could be worse. And coming back to Allegas and Peter, that like a specific image or a specific set of images can make a difference in a specific setting. Like there's well documented cases of images being maybe not the whole reason that a campaign is successful, but a significant part of it, and what people can't see, they can't imagine. You know, like you've got to show people what's going on, and so I think that's really important. But at the same time, the maybe the thing that tempers it is that to be there to get the image that matters, you've got to stomach a lot of things that you might not 100% agree with, and just keep pointing your camera and taking the photo anyway. And that's maybe the reason I'm prepared to go out on a commercial fishing boat or eat a bit of whale to say that I have, and why you know, I admire the diehard and perhaps the optimism and the conviction of the Greenpeace activists I get the privilege of working with, but I also, you know, there's only so many people in the world who can afford to be that way, and some of us have to kind of like get into the dirty reality of it all. And image makers, if you want to make a difference, you kind of have to do that. And yeah, that's a bit of a mishmash of an answer, but
no, I think there was a lot to unpack there, and I even think that even if even if the images that these people are taking are making the change that they're hoping, if they can change and inspire someone like yourself to go out and do that, then surely that's worthy in its own right, you know. So
totally, yeah. Second order effects are not to be discounted. That it's a cumulative process, hey. So it doesn't all change overnight, but someone along the way will take the photo that saves the world.
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting concept, and you know, I've heard people comment around, you know, surely there's something more than just, you know, saying if you're taking a photo of something and you can show the world it, then it will be protected because people will care. You know, what's the next thing beyond that? But I don't know if the photographer's role is anything more than that. It's all we can do is press the shutter button and show what we see. So that's kind of how it is.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a little bit of the death of the artist, isn't it? That insofar as whatever you intended as the creator of the work is irrelevant as soon as it's in the hands of the audience, and so too whatever ideals you held when you created the image become irrelevant when it's in the world. So, and that goes both ways, right? Like it doesn't. You can be have the best of intentions to save the world from some particular disaster by making an image, but you don't actually get to make that happen. Once the photo's in the world, it's up to the world to respond, and that backfires sometimes, and you don't know, and sometimes it's ineffective, and sometimes you don't get the result you want. But also, if you it means sometimes you have to take distasteful images that you're not popular for, and eventually they produce a good outcome, I guess. You know, there's a lot of complex paths for history to be made, and so that's where I try and tell myself that an opportunity to take a photo is pretty rarely one that I want to turn down.
I think it's a pretty amazing approach, and you know, there needs to be people like you out there that can do that are able to morph and try different things and put themselves in positions that they may not be as comfortable being in, and just so that, you know, these things can be documented. And so yeah, kudos to you for doing that. And we've probably avoided the elephant in the room in that discussion in terms of AI, and that's another kind of image that can be created, and where the artist now sits in that piece as well. But
yeah, that's a big discussion. I was going to say here's another image controversy for you.
The whole Wellington thing. So just on that note, Luke, yeah, I've actually already earmarked potentially for, if Jace is up for it, to come back on a panel to talk about AI.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Yeah,
because I spoke to Jace a bit earlier, and he's got a lot of energy and interest, and maybe a kind of surprising view on it as well. So not enough time in the last 10 minutes of a show to start.
Yeah, no,
you can't open that can of worms now.
I couldn't resist.
So this was a really big part of the New Zealand world in the last sort of few years, isn't it? Well, you take us through it.
Yeah, well, this is one image. So I happened to be in Wellington when this freedom occupation was taking place in Parliament grounds, and it was pretty alarming. I think for New Zealand, it was a really divisive topic, obviously around the world, the COVID lockdowns and the vaccine mandates and everything, and a lot of people felt very strongly about it. And I happened to be in Wellington when those feelings boiled over into an occupation of Parliament, and a lot of rhetoric that was a lot more that was very aggressive and violent, and a lot of complicated different groups with different messages and different agendas coming together to sort of shoehorn into each other's campaigns, and so I had heard a lot about it, and I have my own feelings and position on a lot of it, but I figured since I was in Wellington, the best thing to do was just to shoot down there and have a look, and I you know, as someone who's been involved in a lot of all the work for Greenpeace, but also a lot of other activist kind of stuff over the years, I normally will run towards a protest, not away from it, out of interest, and most protesters will have my support. And so I thought, I'll go and wander around and I have a chat to a few people and I'll take a few photos, and the reception I received for having a camera and wearing a mask while I was there was not positive. Let's say I got hassled a lot, and even just around the fringes I got hassled, and it took me a lot to build up the courage to actually go into Parliament grounds and walk around, but I was pretty determined to kind of make my own assessment of things, and so I did, and I walked around, and I sort of used taking photos as my guise, is the reason I was there, and I got challenged constantly about who I was taking photos for and who I was working for, and unfortunately I do work for TVNZ from time to time, and so a couple of times I tried to lead with that and say I do work for TVNZ, but I'm not today, and I was like, that's too complex. So in the end I just said I'm just taking photos for myself and my own purposes, because I was, and people wouldn't believe me, and I got sort of pushed and shoved a bit, and it was all a really eye-opening experience. And anyway, I came away and posted a few photos and my thoughts on the whole experience, and I got quite a lot of pushback on it, but I thought, at least, again, from the same perspective, at least I went and experienced it for myself, and had some direct observation to base my opinions on, and before that I hadn't been saying anything publicly about my thoughts on it all, but then I did, and I think I probably burned a few bridges with a few people, because not everyone agreed with me, but anyway, I came to my own conclusions, and I at least had some direct evidence to support where I was coming from. So, and this is one image that I came away with from that day, which I thought was quite enlightening. I think this is the Parliamentary Library right next to Parliament buildings, and the diversity of people. I mean, I guess the interesting thing was the diversity of people there was really interesting, and there were a lot of people who were there. I mean, there's a couple of people singing a strum up the back, and then people just sitting around chatting, and there's a lot of real chilled out stuff going on, and I can understand that a lot of people's experience was mostly that, but unfortunately there was another side to it, and it was eye-opening anyway. So what are your thoughts about all that stuff? As I came away just kind of thinking that if I had been there with genuine concerns, or some of the concerns that were at the more legitimate end of the scale, I would have got out of there as fast as I can, because it was just being kind of poisoned by some extremist elements who were there just to make trouble.
Well, I think sort of from afar, like especially on little old Tassie down here, we're not. I don't think people really quite understand just how incredibly divisive that whole period of time was in New Zealand culture, and how it just pitted sides of families against each other, and it was really not like much else that had happened in modern history in New Zealand culture in terms of that level of.
I think the Springbok tour is probably the closest analogy where there was such division in society. Hey,
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you were at the epicenter of probably almost the peak of that whole experience, and that's what this encapsulates. And I sort of sit here, being a Kiwi and being away for a long time, and my memories of the land of milk and honey of New Zealand, they're kind of morphing. Like the modern New Zealand has had a lot of really complex issues and big disasters and intense kind of a lot of intensity going on in New Zealand in a way that I haven't sort of expected, or that I feel like I grew up in. And I don't know what that reflects or what that means in the future. But, as photographers, I think, I mean, I'm kind of the same. I apply myself in open ways. And I think, getting to the point where we're wrapping up the show, this is an example where, photography can be used to challenge or educate or polarize or as landscape photographers, we're often using that role for inspiration or connection, and we use beauty and the universal accessibility of it to touch everyone. But there's other roles as a photographer that you've touched on, that I've touched on, that I think are just as significant, and they're not always as pretty or as easy, and they might involve people banging in the shoulder, but and they might challenge your own inner purpose and intent as well. And I remember watching from afar, seeing the intensity of your response to this experience as well. That as a photographer and diving right in there, it actually kind of changed you or really heavily impacted you through that process of taking photographs that you might not have been open, you might not have experienced otherwise,
Yeah, I think it is interesting that whole and that probably ties back to that thing of for me, my journey coming from the purest landscape photographer to trying to be more about the storytelling element, and that has led me to including people in my images, which it's like a minor change. It's a tiny example, but that I think that's a really interesting thing, that landscape photography is extremely powerful, but only when you kind of harness it. And that doesn't mean you have to, my direction is not the only way to tackle that, but it's a powerful medium, and so if you reflect on that in your own practice, you can potentially find some greater purpose to what you're doing if you can find something to communicate that's it's a bit beyond the superficial sort of landscape representation, or even the idealized landscape,
Well, I mean, the landscape of the world's changing.
Yeah.
Jace, do you want to finish on an image, or is there one other particular one you want?
Let's go to something nice. One of my favorite birds, the field.
So which one?
The field, the blue duck.
The blue duck, yes. I wasn't familiar with the other name. Yeah.
So this was I was actually on a video job for a beautiful man who is embarking on a project to run workshops for young Māori or any Māori people to connect with their culture and use it as an empowerment tool to become better people, and for groups of people working in healthcare and working in all kinds of places. And we were shooting in this river and just having, focusing on our own stuff. And this blue duck was just hanging around the whole time, just within 10-15 meters of us, just feeding and playing around in the rapids. And and it was really special because the woman who was sort of the talent for the shoot was from the Aotearoa, which is the iwi named after the field, and so it was a really special moment. And so I shot some video and there's photos of this little individual. Usually they operate in pairs, but this guy or girl was on its lonesome, and now I'm going to do some prints for him and her, and it just was this really nice thing where it was incidental to the objectives of the job, but by being out there, you can you get to be in a place where something like this can happen. You can hang out with a special endangered bird, and it can have then this other layer of the cultural significance of it, and so that he was just beside himself, so stoked, and I said, I think I'm going to do some prints for you guys, and he was just so chuffed, and it's a nice little thing of the power of image making for positive and for good, that you can really he'll remember that day forever. I think that he's investing this money in a video to promote this passion project that he's been working on, and this, that's all well and good, but this is something, just a bit of serendipity that's so special, and by being able to capture it and print it and preserve it, it's a real huge for him, for his own journey, but also for him to be able to give that as a gift to the person who helped him. It's super powerful, and that was a real nice reminder of the value of photography, even when it's sort of a little bit incidental.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a testament to your open-minded and open-heartedness too, Jace, as well, a moment like that, because it wasn't on brief, but you felt into it and lent into what the moment provided, and it kind of transcended what everyone was hoping for. It's doesn't always happen, particularly when you're out on commercial jobs, but
yeah,
that was fantastic, mate. Well, that might be our last image for tonight. I feel in some ways we're just scratching the surface of Mr. Jase Blair, because I know many, many, many other sides of this wonderful man, and we've only seen a few of them, but we've had a good little window. So it could be that down the track we do a part two, my friend. And if you're open to potentially being on the AI panel, like I love how your mind works, and I think it's one of the great, well, I don't know if challenge is the word, but it's one of the biggest unknowns and one of the most fastest changing things that's happening in the world right now, and we're all sort of scratching our heads going, what the heck does this mean? And I think, Luke and I said at the beginning of the year, like, that's probably going to be a fairly consistent theme through the year, that we touch base with people and their thoughts around it, and it's going to be probably really different what we're talking about in February as opposed to what we're talking about in August. Like it's changing that fast. But I would like to maybe actually put together an actual panel of maybe a number of quite
really
thoughtful people. And you might be interested in that, just see what the other people's points of view on that as well, Jace, because it's I know you've had a lot of conversations about it with people. So
100%.
I think having the graphic design background as well is quite an interesting addition to that as well, given that that's a major component of putting it all together. Yeah,
for sure. Sounds great.
And we didn't touch base on that, but another thread is maybe organizations like AEDT and things like competitions. Like it's been a big part of your modern life, and you've really committed to that group and that organization, and that's something I'm very proudly a part of as well. But that'll wrap up our cotton wool ears for tonight. We've been skating around some pretty amazing conversations here, mate. We always had to squeeze in just looking at images because there's so much great stuff we're talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
And some great parallels across my life and Luke's life and passion for off track and remote area walking and stuff as well. So really appreciate your time, mate. It's almost 20 to midnight over there. So
yeah, you've done great. Well done on the time
mate.
zone difference. So really appreciate it.
I'm sorry I didn't get to the just not that anyone else would know, but Jason and I I was hoping to do some crazy bush pilot trip to Fiordland with him on this last trip before that storm came in. So I'm going to hedge my bets and hope that still happens sooner rather than later, my friend.
Yeah, man, it's still on the cards. It hasn't happened yet. The
oh, it hasn't yet. Oh, okay, yeah. And big hugs to Brittany. Thanks for letting us take your attention away for the evening.
Absolutely.
And so big hello to her for me, and and all the New Zealand crew, mate, and that beautiful Te Ponamu. Oh my God, I just got that wrong. Te Waiponamu, the South Island. Like I originally had that name for this episode, but we were quite. Wait a minute, you put that up on a YouTube block, and people are like, well, what's that? You know, like with no context.
Confuse Australians.
Yeah, it's really Australians, all those international viewers, but you keep well, my friend, and blessings to all your friends and loved ones that have been struggling through this time. And, you know, I've certainly spent a lot of time on the phone the last 3 or 4 days connecting with people and a lot of people in the NZOPP community too, actually, just to double check how they're doing. And
Mike, can I squeeze in the last plug?
please, yeah.
I am helping organise a print sale for the cyclone relief, specifically trying to target the photograph community. So donate images, head up the NZOPP Facebook page. You'll see an opportunity to donate images, and we've got Rachel Smith printing in the North Island and me printing in the South Island for all orders. And the buy a print, donate an image, whatever you like, get involved. So,
Oh, mate, I'll get onto that straight after this. Yeah. So just NZOPP, which if people didn't know, that's the New Zealand Institute of Professional Photography, NZOPP.
And if you're a member, the call's going out to members. If you're anyone out there who's a member, donate an image. And if you're not, look out shortly for the details on the print sale and buy a print.
Do I count, mate? I can never tell. I've got one foot at both camps, mate. I still never figured it out.
Check your email or jump in the Facebook group and see if you can find the link. Otherwise, keep an eye out and we'll
that's a really great one. Thanks. I'm gonna spend a bit of time with that tonight.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your time, mate. You keep well.
More than welcome. It was good.
Other
It was
than
good
me,
time.
Jace. Yeah.
Keep OGing the West Coast, mate. You're the man over there.
Till next time.
Yeah, see you next time.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us tonight, and feel free to like and subscribe, and follow along for our next episode, hopefully in a couple of weeks, and sign up to our mailing list so you can get some updates on what the next show is going to be. Until then, catch you later and have a good evening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Kia ora, brother.